Thanks, David, and thanks for everyone having us here today to talk about post-played party cookie and where we are we still on track? Just a quick note, Sophie unfortunately can't join us today. She does send her apologies, so it's just going to be myself, Nick, Zach, and Hilary. So as the year draws to a close with quite a lot of activity that has happened, let's take a look back and see, are we still on track? What does the future hold, and what are the focuses? So Nick, I might start with you. If you can let us know a bit of your background, and also where do you think we are now, and also what are you working on?
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, my name's Nick Welch. I'm the programmatic lead here at Integral Ad Science across Northern Europe. And it's such a big, super big question. I think the fact that Google obviously have delayed the deprecation of cookies to 2023 is a bit of insight into where we are as an industry. I think we're still broadly testing alternatives. There are still some big question marks around one-to-one marketing. I think that's possibly going to go away in favor of more probabilistic kind of cohorts, or even non-PII orientated advertising such as contextual. And in our case, that we're building out best practices specifically around contextual, given that's an area that lends itself quite well to us, and the fact that we're very much involved in understanding context and content at the page level. Obviously, we've recently made an acquisition in CTV, which is Publica, which gives us the opportunity to start developing a multimodal view and contextual. So that's looking at audio, that's looking at frame by frame video analysis, and that's looking at obviously natural language processing and the semantics of the page.
Excellent. Yeah, and obviously very important given that there will be an element of kind of anonymous as well. So we need to make sure we focus on that. Zach, your thoughts on where we are now, and also what your focus is at OneTrust?
Yeah, thanks, Hayward. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name's Zachary Faruque. I'm an offering manager here at OneTrust. I'm responsible for our consent and preference management products. Where are we today as opposed to 6 months ago? I think probably still in flux. There are a lot of challenges. Google don't really know what they're doing. They obviously halted FLoC. They didn't test it in the EU because they weren't sure that it wasn't going to breach any GDPR or e-privacy regulations. I think the challenge is that it's a moving target. Ultimately, third-party cookies have to go away. They are incompatible with privacy, they're incompatible with trust, and they're incompatible with transparency with consumers, just as a technology. So they are going to disappear. The challenge becomes, what is the solution that then sits on top? And even just as recently as last week with the Belgian DPA, that initial ruling in regards to the TCF, the TC string being personal data, is going to have a massive knock-on impact to a lot of the propositions and solutions being put forward at the moment to replace third-party cookies. Because if the TC string becomes personal data, then the majority of those solutions also become personal data, and therefore the owners of them, more importantly, become joint controllers. And so I think it's a real challenge ultimately at the moment, and we don't really know what the solution is going to be. From a OneTrust perspective, we're heavily investing in integrations, and that is direct integrations with the social media companies, it's integrations with all of the framework solutions being put forward at the moment. From a channel space, we are heavily investing in increasing our CTV OTT presence as well, to make sure that we can support consent in those different channels as well. But I think even with, as I said last week, as it puts the ball in the middle of the park again, it's where we thought we were getting somewhere, we're potentially not anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of variables and often unexpected ones constantly coming up. And Hilary, from your perspective at the DSP level, what are your focuses on, and where are we now?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Just to give a context, my name's Hilary. I'm Senior Director of Business Development here at the Trade Desk. I think I picked up on a couple of things that have been mentioned by some of the panelists before, and one of the areas that I think was really important to confirm is the death of the cookies, or that cookies are going away, and that is inevitable. And I think as an industry, that's something that the more prepared and more aware of the fact that we're heading towards that direction, the better informed we're going to be in the way that we as a collaborative industry work towards helping the education process of what that new future looks like. So I think Zach made a really good point that it is going to go away, but there's obviously challenges around what the new norm is going to look like. And obviously, a lot of information's out there on the trade press and thinking about how the trade desk has positioned ourselves in terms of where we think that future is. And we've definitely, alongside a large number of other companies, feel that future lies around Unified ID 2.0. And we think at the heart of that, it's got to be around learning from an upgrade on what cookies don't do so well and what the future looks like. And that future consists of putting the user at the heart of it, control being a key part of it, transparency, and then obviously the big thing here is education and helping people understand what the value exchange of the internet really is. And that's something that we're really passionate that UID solves and hopefully future-proofs us for the future.
Absolutely, yeah. I think education is key here. As us in the industry, we often forget that we're in this kind of ivory tower sort of scenario, and a lot of people don't actually understand in detail what's going on. We've all mentioned and touched on, obviously, the Google decision to kind of push their deprecation of third-party cookies out or kick the can down the road a little bit. Has this, and you each touched on it, but has this announcement delayed your progress? Has it shifted focus? Has it accelerated where you are now? Zach, let's start with yourself.
No, certainly not delayed in any way, shape or form. From a OneTrust perspective, what we care about is helping companies build trusted relationships with their employees, their consumers, really everyone around them. And deprecation of third-party cookies is well overdue. There was a question in the chat, actually, I think, in regards to, is the loss of cookies the problem or is it consent? Loss of cookies, certainly not a problem from a consumer perspective. I think that the challenge with consent is that cookies gave for consent was that the ecosystem is so complex. If you look at what consent needs to be under GDPR, it needs to be informed, it needs to be granular, it needs to be unbundled. For a general consumer coming to a website, there's no way they can understand what they're consenting to when it comes to third-party cookies in the ad tech ecosystem in such a short space of time. And so it goes back to the point that Hilary was making in regards to education. But absolutely not, certainly not slowed us down. If anything, it's sped us up, and wherever we can start building transparency into consumer experiences, whether that's data capture, whether it's the ad tech ecosystem, whether it's marketing communications, it's imperative for us.
Yeah, and I was going to touch actually what you were saying goes back to also what Hilary said around the user being at the center of
yeah.
it. Hilary, you mentioned obviously Unified ID 2.0. Has Google's announcement affected the delivery of that, Trade Desk, or any focus at all?
The short answer is no. And the more extended answer is actually we've had so many more engaging conversations around this subject. And I think that the interesting thing, and I think one thing that's been talked about earlier in previous questions, is that UID has been positioned, and the key thing to get across here when we talk about the Trade Desk and UID, it's not a Trade Desk product. That's really important for everyone to be aware of that. It's an initiative that people from the ad tech industry, whether it be measurement partners, whether it be publishers, whether it be other DSPs and SSPs, are all endorsing, because it is that upgrade to cookies, and it is ultimately looking at what the future looks like outside of a cookieless world. So ultimately that sort of education piece of explaining why all of these groups of people are looking at the open internet and seeing the value that this can bring is something that actually we've had lots of conversations about, because that then leads on to bigger conversations, which are, is there going to be one identifier for the open internet as a result, and is that going to be UID2? In an ideal world, we'd love that to be the case. The reality is there's probably going to be more than one. And then it's about explaining and educating the value of identifiers play, not just from that user. And that simple example of, I go onto a website, if I'm able to go onto that website and consume free content, what is the trade-off? What is that publisher doing? How are they being able to pay their journalists? What is it that I'm prepared to trade to continue receiving that content versus I still want to have control in the way that my data is used if I'm exchanging that? So all of those types of conversations we're continuing to have. So no, the announcement hasn't slowed that down at all.
Excellent. And Nick, from an IAS perspective, what are your thoughts?
So I agree with what the other panelists have said in terms of it certainly hasn't slowed us down. Having evolved from a verification company to a quality media company, context was a key component of that. And let's not forget the reason why we're in this position, which is the consumer experience. And I think third-party cookies, retargeting consumers over and over again with no consideration for frequency capping, concerns around how data is being used, all led to this in the first place. So yeah, we're continuing to develop and increasingly helping marketeers offer relevant experiences for identifying users in the right environment, in the right mindset, at the right time. And so that's one part. From a verification point of view, we've never relied on cookies to inform our verification products on the side of fraud or brand safety. So we've never touched the cookie. One thing I will say is that Unified ID 2.0 is clearly there is going to be a desire both on the seller and the buy side to match first-party data. The challenge there is that you need a standard to be able to match those 2 points, but first-party data is never going to have the same scale as third-party data. And I think that's where the big question mark is around the cookie, right? It's about being able to identify those users off of your own media in order for marketeers to be able to understand kind of performance. That's where there's still a big question mark. And what we're seeing is more marketeers leaning into entirely privacy compliant by design solutions like contextual targeting, whilst they still have the ability to look and measure at various performance metrics, whether that be conversions or what have you, and then start to build out their own intelligence on how contextual actually performs so that they're well prepared when it comes to the eventual deprecation of cookies.
Brilliant. Makes sense. And that actually leads quite nicely into the next question, because we've focused on each of your current focuses and the recent announcements about Google and how they've impacted it. But if we take a look at a little bit more of a macro view, in terms of the kind of conversations that you've had within the industry, is there a sense of preparedness? Do we have solutions in place yet, or is there still more to be done? Hilary, should we start with you?
Yeah, I think when we think about are there solutions out in market, the answer is that there are solutions out in market, but I think what's important is that the due diligence on those solutions and explaining how they're not the only answer to the future of how you are going to approach this cookieless world is what we're trying to get more sort of clarity when we're talking to our partners, whether it be advertisers directly or to agencies. And I think it picks up on something that Nick mentioned in terms of UID and some of the challenges, or any identifying some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that contextual will play, how it will play a role. And I think that's the key thing, is actually not looking at racing towards one as the solution, because absolutely conversations around the use of first-party data is going to be imperative, and we've had lots of conversation with brands about that. But there are some brands out there where first-party data they don't have the means to be able to facilitate that. If you think about FMCG brands and thinking about your own purchasing habits and whether you're going to be prepared to give your data over to a brand that potentially, for example, for a toilet roll. Is there a natural trade-off in that? So are you collecting that first-party data to be able to do that? But actually, the power of contextual strategies, as well as other ways that the replacement of third-party cookies and being able to look at potentially reaching now measurable in terms of acquiring new business as well as retaining business. All of this is a combination of things that absolutely we're having those conversations about. So I don't think there are opportunities out there. There is testing going out, but I think this is the key point for people to do that. This is the perfect time to have those conversations, to explore and to test the solutions that are out in market.
Excellent. And Nick, you touched on it before, but what's the sense of that you get in terms of the wider market?
So the sense I get in terms of the wider market, if I could look at it like chronologically, at first it was panic and some concern that people had got comfortable with using cookies to target, and also comfortable with those kind of attribution metrics that the cookie lends itself to, and were perhaps, looking at contextual again, we're perhaps looking at contextuals, but this is something that's always been done. It's not sexy, it's not new, but actually what we're seeing now is traders and marketeers are being forced to look at contextual through a new lens, but not look at other targeting or privacy by design compliant targeting methods through a new lens and starting to look at performance. Contextual hasn't always been seen as a way of targeting at the bottom of the funnel, but actually we're releasing some case studies imminently. But what we are seeing is that actually it's much more cost effective to go down the contextual route, and actually it's going beyond the CPA goals of some traditional audience-based segments. So this kind of epoch that we're going through when it comes to digital marketing is actually forcing us to look at a new set of behaviors that puts the consumer at the center. And actually it's challenging our preconceptions over what works and what doesn't work. And I think it's a good thing. It's going to be like change is always quite painful, but through change comes growth. And I think to Hilary's point and to Zach's point, it's going to be bumpy. There's not going to be one solution that fixes absolutely everything, but it is forcing us to develop a new set of behaviors, learn, and hopefully, create an open web where the consumer plays an important role and feels like there's a decent value exchange.
Absolutely, makes sense. So almost a shift back to focusing on ROI. And interesting, I think one of the panelists in the previous panel, Wayne, asked around the intention metrics, and it sounds like that is something that's going to be a bit of focus. Zach, your thoughts on the wider market?
Completely agree with both Hilary and Nick there in regards to testing. The sheer fact that Google did push the date back and postpone it shows the cliff edge that will happen when it happens. It's so imperative for brands to be trying out different things today so that they're ready before that happens. I think part of it is trying to bite size up and chunk up the different impacts that they're going to see. So if we think about consumers and retargeting, then obviously at the moment the ad tech ecosystem is fantastic for visitors to an advertiser's website. They then go to a publisher's website and the advertiser is able to show an ad to that individual. So how we retarget those people that have already come to our website. But then there may also be the use case where we're trying to target a demographic or a subset of people that have never been onto our website, and so we're trying to do that. And I think it's about chunking it down and not looking for a single solution to do all of these different things for you and coming up with different strategies. Certainly retargeting in the first case, the example I always give was that I unfortunately decided to try and propose during COVID when retail was shut. But how do you go about getting an engagement ring without your girlfriend or your partner being spammed with adverts because you're online looking for engagement rings? And so there's loads of cool strategies you can think about when you take that problem just in itself and you say, actually, why don't we just ask the person that comes to our website, are you looking for an engagement ring or are you looking for a surprise gift? If they say yes, your secret's safe with us, but what we would like to do is send you discounts. Give us your email address. Can you imagine the marketable universe database for the jewelers that does that first? So I think there are lots of different strategies you can take that you need to be trying today, but it is about breaking it down into different bite-sized pieces rather than trying to solve for third-party cookies and all of their use cases in one fell swoop.
Brilliant. I love the use case. I had a similar scenario, but the ads helped me figure out what she liked. So there was.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah.
So moving on, I think we loosely touched on the opportunities, but let's dive into what do we think the opportunities and the potential threats are as we move forward, and are there past learnings that we should be mindful of going into this? Nick, let's start with you. Oh, did I break up?
I'm really sorry, Andrew. I have to ask you to repeat that.
Repeat the question. No worries. That's all right. So the question was around, so we see what are the opportunities and threats as we move on into 2022, and are there past learnings that we should be mindful of as well?
Yeah, so I think the opportunities definitely are around to create new engagement and performance metrics that go beyond cookies and clicks. So I think everyone has debated whether or not the click was a decent measure of attribution. I would say most people, if you ask them, doubted whether or not that was actually a valid way of monitoring performance, but everyone's used to it, everyone does it, so they'll continue to do it. Now, I think the opportunity is that we move away from that. We start gathering together other data. So viewability, you touched on attention, time in view, married with context, married with other signals might lend itself better to determining, and then obviously looking at ROI, right? Real ROI, especially when we're looking at businesses that are online specifically and are looking to sell products directly to consumers. It's measuring actually the return on the sale. I think that's hugely important. The threat is still that we've got a poor handle on the customer experience. I think what was mentioned earlier is, I believe Zach brought this point up, is the, unfortunately, frequency capping is, how do you solve for that? How do you solve for that when you don't have a cookie that follows that follows the user across the web? That's going to be particularly difficult. And I think also the fact that that we are encouraging and saying that there's going to be more than one solution, right? It's not just contextual, it's not just unified ID, but with multiple solutions, fragmented solutions, that could lead to a lack of standards. And we know what that was like. When you asked what's historically, have we got anything to learn from? Well, look at viewability, right? When viewability was a thing, everyone was developing their own kind of standards for viewability until the MRC got involved and set their own standard, which everyone broadly aligned to. Viewability was meaningless because everyone had their own specific standard for viewability. And there is a risk that performance might go down the same route.
Absolutely. Zach, what are your thoughts?
I think undoubtedly the biggest opportunity here is to improve the customer experience. That is the ultimate full stop on it, because as of today, we're in a world where the digital ecosystem, all of us, when we're online, we're treated as a number, not as a human being, not as a person on the other side of that computer. We are just a number that is feeding into different types of KPIs. That's not the experience that you see or feel when you go into a bricks and mortar store. There's not a lawyer waiting for you to sign a disclosure before you even enter the store. There isn't a private eye following you to each and every store afterwards to find out where you live so that they can direct mail you. So I think there's an opportunity to right the ship of the digital ecosystem that has ultimately got out of hand. And I think the awareness from a consumer perspective is driving much of this rather than regulations themselves. Things like the social dilemma on Netflix. For the Gen Zs, this is what they're growing up with. They're understanding that knowledge, the digital footprint, how important their data is. So I think the real opportunity is there for all of the consumers, and it's for businesses to work out how they can continue to advertise, continue to acquire new customers and users, but do that in a way that doesn't remove any rights from the consumers themselves.
Excellent. And Hilary, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the guys have covered it off really well and made some really good points. I think to add maybe something slightly different, but along the same vein, is thinking about the opportunity for an upgrade going forward and how that upgrade impacts across all channels. In the previous panel, at the end, they asked, what are your sort of key thoughts for 2022? What are going to be the drivers? And we did that poll and we saw CTV and mobile come up as top. And interestingly enough, both those channels don't use cookies. So if we're thinking about that, thinking about what that new feature could look like and what the opportunity is, we've got a real opportunity to have an identifier that truly is omnichannel, that gives us an opportunity to actually, when we're talking about frequency capping, when we're talking about measurement and being able to think about the way that brands and marketeers think about the way that their campaigns have moved and affected the outcome that they're looking for, there's a potential to have a new identifier that's up to date, but has at its heart got privacy in it, that delivers against those things. So I think the opportunity there is great. In terms of the threats, we did a little bit of our own sort of research, and we found that actually 79% of UK adults were actually concerned about the collection of their data and what it's being used for. So trust is a big thing, right? So that is a big threat. Any solution that goes out to market, if it doesn't deliver on that trust aspect and that users understand, then it's not going to work properly. So I say all of that in the sense that people still want to be able to have seamless experiences, have relevant ads served to them, but we've got to strike that balance between personalization and privacy.
Excellent. Yeah, trust is paramount for everything that we're doing right now. Given time, we've got a few questions from the audience. I do love an audience question, so we might flip over to those. So the first one that we've got is, What do the panel believe will be the main, oh, just lost it, 1 second. What do the panel believe will be the main source of data or data sources in the future, and what level of quality, deterministic rather than scraped second-hand data would they desire? Zach, should we start with you?
For me, I think it's going to be first and second party data. So either data that you're capturing yourselves directly from your consumers and users, or data that you're getting directly from a second party, but that they captured themselves direct. Data sharing is still an incredibly important part of the customer experience. If we don't do data sharing, then it's detrimental to consumers. If you think about purchasing a car, why can't I click a button and my details get transferred over to an insurance broker? Because I can't drive it off the forecourt unless I've got insurance. But right now I need to fill in all my details with the dealership or the brand, the car manufacturer, and then all of my details again with the secondary company. So I think data sharing is incredibly important and increasingly more important for the consumer experience. But it's just, how do we capture that data and ensure that we can pass that on to second parties in a way that's transparent?
Excellent. And Hilary, what are your thoughts on the sort of main data sources in the future?
Yeah, I think it's linked to one of the questions we had before, and the answers around first-party data and that being a key part. I also think first-party data owners, so retailers, is going to be huge, just because of the way that they have the opportunity to look at transaction data, off-site data, and how that impacts brands' actual purchases and the funnel sort of funnel sort of ways of measurement. So I would say definitely first-party data, and those data owners, such as retailers, are going to play a big part in terms of the types of data that's going to be very useful in the future.
Excellent. And Nick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I know the questions around what level of quality deterministic data rather than scraped. I don't think it's going to all be about deterministic data. I really don't. I think there is, in order to have in order to deliver marketers the scale that they need to identify new audiences, there is going to have to be an element of probabilistic data. So I agree with what Hilary and Zach said. First party data is clearly going to play a key role, but is there enough of it? Outside of the walled gardens, is there enough of it? And are you able to match it to your media partners? And do the media partners have enough of it? And yes, completely agree with Hilary. Big retailers who have access to a ton of data, and whether they can start to use that in-store data to create kind of new, interesting segments, that is one thing. But I do think we'll start to, I hate to say it, but panel data at scale, and how that panel data might be married to contextual data. So let's think about Ipsos collecting data about key demographics. And let's say that certain key demographics like football might over-index against men. Okay, let's then look at how do we marry that panel data at scale with contextual environments to almost deliver an audience proxy segment. It is probabilistic, yes, but I think we're going to see more behavior like that. And Google are going to be spending more time on their cohorts and flock, and how does an aggregated view of audience behavior within the browser, how do we collect that in a safe way to deliver really smart probabilistic data? I think it's a combination of the two. I don't think deterministic data on its own is going to be enough.
Makes sense, absolutely. We've got some more questions coming in. I think given time, we might not be able to get to them. What we'll do is, as we always like to get a prediction at the end of these. So for the next 12 months, what are each of your predictions? How is the industry going to progress? Nick, let's just start with you.
There's another delay.
I'm
hoping there isn't, right? But my prediction is I want to err on the side of optimism, and what I hope to see is the consumer playing an active role, and that we're actually giving the consumer what they want, and the internet and the way that we monetize the internet changes for the better. And I think the future is bright. I think we're going to see a lot of businesses start to lean in, and actually Europe's going to play an integral role in how we develop new opportunities for marketers and for publishers.
Excellent. And Zach, your thoughts?
I think it's an opportunity, and I think the industry generally is going this way. We certainly see the big tech companies doing this, starting to think about the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. Whenever you try and just borderline the letter of the law, you always come unstuck because a new law comes out or someone else makes a different decision or a new precedent is made. So I think the opportunity in the next year is to start thinking about the spirit of the law and think about solutions that will be able to last in the future, not just last for 6 months until the privacy regulation comes out or until the next law comes out.
Makes sense. And Hilary, to round us off, what are your thoughts, prediction for the next 12 months?
I'm excited. I think the next 12 months we're going to see a up-leveling of information when it comes to the understanding of what new technologies are going to be able to offer going forward. And I think an up-leveling of people's understanding of the use of the internet and the value exchange. And I think that's really exciting. I think we talk about the origins of the death of the cookie, but actually the re-education and the support of putting privacy at the first and also control back in users' hands, but also giving them that framework of understanding how the internet works. So I think that's really exciting, and I think it's an opportunity for us to really push that message, and I think that message will drive the right solution to market because it will put the user at the heart of it.
Excellent. There you have it. So we've touched on there's a need for education, trust is paramount, the user has to be center, and there's potential needs for standards, and test and learn, don't rush into something, but the future seems positive. Thank you, Zach, Nick, and Hilary, so much for your time. Really engaging. I'm sure we could have carried on talking about this for much more time, but really appreciate your time today. I'll hand back to David.